Okay, so the plan for today is to start on the shirt for Aziraphale. For those who don't know by shirt, what I mean is essentially what we would today call an undershirt. It's his underwear. We're starting from the base up because we're starting with the easiest thing first. And when I say easy, I mean easy. So this is the pattern that I'm going to majority be basing it off. It's from the Tudor Tailor. For now, I'm just doing a very basic version of it with just embroidery around the collar and the sleeves. I will be learning along with you because this is my first time making a shirt. I am not expecting any major problems. The only thing that I haven't done before is put a gusset in, and I understand the theory. How it goes in practice we'll see, but I'm not expecting any problems there. Famous last words, I'm just gonna rub on some wood gently. The only things that I'm slightly concerned about is sizing and stuff, but you've seen the pattern. It's all straight lines, it's all squares. So let's get to it. Originally, shirts would have been made from linen, and for someone like Aziraphale, who's high class and has money, it would have been made from linen lawn. However, due to availability and cost, I decided to use cotton lawn. Was technically available back then, so it's not completely out there, and at least it's a natural material and has about the same weight. But more importantly, I got the end of a roll for about 25 euros. Shirts were mostly made selvage to selvage, so that's what I did, completely forgetting that the selvage on modern cotton is far too wide, so I had to correct this later. Originally, as you can see here, the shoulders were folded rather than seamed, so I'm just marking the centre and then cutting the neck hole, something that I had to redo later. For the length, I measured to around the knee, which is about the right length, figuring that if it was too long, I would cut it off later. To hem the extension from the collar, I turned the fabric over once and then turned it over once again to make a double turn hem. At the bottom, I angled the folds to meet together in the centre. Once that was pinned into place on both sides, I stitched it down with a felling stitch, making sure to only catch one thread on the outside at a time. For the entire project, I used 100% cotton thread to match the fabric. What I found super interesting is that there are extent garments where the stitching is so fine that you need a microscope to see it. Sadly, my stitching is not quite that fine. I'm pretty happy with it nonetheless. To secure the collar and make sure that it doesn't tear, I put in a bar stitch about ½ centimetre from the bottom. To make it, you need to pass the needle through each side a couple of times to make a loop. And then you use a blanket stitch to gather the loops into a bar, pushing them along until they're tight. And once it's tied off, you've got a sturdy little bar stitch. So for the sleeves, I also went off pattern and just used the selvage length, which in this case is 150 centimetres, and the width that I normally use for sleeves. Once you divide the selvage length in two, you've got 75 centimetres for the length of each sleeve, and then with the 50 centimetres that I normally use, you've got a nice rectangle. Once that was marked down, I cut it off and cut it in half to give me the two sleeves. And then for the gussets, I did actually go back to the book and the pattern and then ummed and ahed for ages about how much seam allowance I wanted. In the end, I just went for 1.5 centimetres. Here I'm cutting 3 squares, 2 arm gussets, one that I put aside to be cut in half to become the neck gussets. Sewing in the gusset turned out to be as simple as I'd hoped. One side of the square gets sewn to the seam of the side on the arm size side, and then the other side of the seam gets sewn to the adjoining side of the square, bringing them to a point. I went with backstitch for the seam so that it was durable, and pre-marked my seam allowance so it met nicely in the middle. Once the gussets were in, I used a running back stitch on the arm seams, so 5 running stitches. And then a back stitch to hold them in securely. So this is the progress from last night and this morning. Both gussets are in completely with a back stitch. You can see there and pressed obviously. I've started to use a tacking stitch rather than pins because I've been taking it to class. I've used a running back stitch for these. I don't know, probably actually is more visible on the back side, but even then not really. So once this one's done, it will be pressing both of these seams and then neatening those, and then the sleeves will be ready to go in. Now that everything is sewn, I need to trim down the seam allowance to fold it under to neaten it up. So I'm just going to cut this down by half. All the way along here. That was not half on some of it, never mind. And then that will just fold over the gusset. I need to, that's the diamond there, so I just need to snip that corner down to there. And then this side is folding over, so on the gusset this bit needs to go, or down to half again. And then from there it's exactly the same as I did on the collar, just folding it over itself and sewing it down with little lip stitches. So I'll do the gusset side first, which is this side. So that will go over like that, all the way down to there. And then this will go down and it will go over on the corner. I'm going to pin that down, well, I can do the first one here, and then like that, all the way along. I'm going to pin that down and then baste it again. So in real life it's been about a month and a half since I last checked in, but we now have 2 sleeves that are completely finished, or rather the insides are finished. Seaming is done on both sides. So this is part of the reason why they took so long. What we've got here is my 2 cuffs and my collar. That took about 3 weeks, more or less. And when I say 3 weeks, I think there was one day where I only sewed under an hour. Some of the other days were 6+ hours. I managed to do the entire collar in a week, which was a small miracle because I then had to get on with other projects because they were on a deadline, but I now finally have time to go back to this, at least for the moment. No, this is not counted, it's not on both sides. There's 2 reasons for that. First reason is this material, I'm kind of regretting it honestly with the time that we've had in between. I think I should have gone for linen, but anyway, it is now cotton and it is staying cotton until I have the time and the money to redo it, which is not going to be immediately. It's still going to look fine, it's just gonna make me cry on the inside, make other people cry on the inside because of historical accuracy. So yes, one reason is the material. Because it's cotton, you can't count threads in quite the same way. Although what I did find is I could use the diagonal to do the cross-hatching on the leaves, so that was good at least. The other reason is time. I don't do counted embroidery. It's something I need to pick up at some point. I could do it in theory, but I'm just not that precise. I much prefer to do it freehand, and in my research I found that freehand black work was a thing in this period. I hope that's correct, because that's now what we have, but since it's going to be folded over, it's not going to be visible anyway. I'm really happy with how it turned out. We've also got the tiny little spoiler here. Someone clearly got to Aziraphale's Tailor and just snuck that in. So what I'm doing now is just folding this in half so I can mark that line. What I wanted to do was keep it attached to the full piece of material, because they wouldn't have wasted any material back in the day, but back in the day they would have also A, not been carrying it to and from classes because, you know, specialists, and B, they would have had it on a frame rather than in a hoop, but sadly I don't have a frame, I only have a hoop. So I was having to move it along. I couldn't fit the whole piece of material in there. I haven't recorded any of the embroidery this time because honestly that's a video in itself. So that will be coming at some point in the future. So I have ironed a crease for the bottom and the top of the embroidery. So we've got one piece here and one piece here. And then I'm just going to match the back up with the front. I'm just going to pull out these threads so I can save them, at least far enough back. I've been keeping all the threads that I've been using to thread mark and gather and everything like that, and using them to actually sew with further down the line, because I feel like that matches the whole little waist as possible, because everything was a bloody expensive thing. Time to face the music, and hopefully not to cut my ironing board, because if I do, my wife will be pissed. Now this is done, I can pull out the thread marks on here because they're all marked instead by the press, and then I can cut this down in half, sew these together, and then use that to measure my gathering lines on my actual sleeves, and then actually get some progress done from there. Sleeves might be a pain in the ass sometimes, but the one advantage to them is that you have two lots, so you have two goes at it. So I have one cuff done already, and I'm just going to show you what I did. What I've already done is sewn 2 lots of gathering threads. I've also marked the midpoint. I split it into quarters. So I've got 1/4, half, and then the other quarter on the other side. So I'm not taking the felled edge of the seam, I'm taking the actual seam and then folding it in half. I'm going to mark that. If anyone's asking, yes, I'm using a watercoloured pencil. This is what I also use to mark my embroidery. Eventually I will do an embroidery video which will probably cover that. So the next job is to line these two up. Stick a pin in it, that's one side. Turn it around, find the midpoint in there and the midpoint on there. Line those two up. I'm putting my pin underneath the gathering lines. And then that's my quarter, first quarter. That's the second quarter. My 2 gathering lines are actually one gathering line that goes over in the middle. So if I pull on these 2, I know that the other end is secured. And then I just need to pull it. This is one mistake that I made on the other side. I thought, oh yes, I can use that round end to pull on. And then of course they kept falling off on the other side. So that was incredibly dumb. So yes, just pull it to make the gathers. The other advantage of doing sleeves when you're doing gathers is you can just stick your hand in and it fits nicely and is just the right size to pull them all out to the right place. And just try and distribute them around a bit. I'm not worrying about getting them too even immediately, I just want it to fit. So this is what I mean by you can stick your hand in and it stretches it out. It just makes it a lot, or I find it makes it a lot easier. It's actually not bad. So now that I've got them all fitting, I just need to even it out. So start from the far side, which is this side, pull it up nice and straight, and then just try and distribute these evenly. You can use a pin to stroke them along, which helps to get them a bit more even. And then once I'm happy, avoiding my fingers which are underneath, I'm just going to stick pin through the middle, then move on to the next quarter, and again get it roughly even first, then stroke out the rest of them. And so what I need to do now is just put a knot in here to make sure it doesn't stretch anymore. So that's tightened that off. Now, if I was sewing by machine, I'd probably honestly just leave it and do it with the pins in. But what I discovered earlier is that there's too many gathers and it goes everywhere. So what I'm going to do is what I did earlier, which is just secure that down with a tacking stitch. Try and do fairly small running stitches just to keep as many of those in place as possible and take the pins out. The other reason is that I actually need to turn this inside out. Okay, and with that tacked down, all I need to do now is turn this inside out. So I've got my fold lining that I made with the iron earlier, my crease line that I'm going to use as a sewing line. And I want to do it on this side so I can make sure that I've got it in the right place against the embroidery. And then once I've done that, I'll just pink the edges just to make sure, because they're a bit frayed, just neaten them up. And then fold it over and fell it, which is what I did with this one. Then on the inside it'll be nice and neat. That's the next job, and I'll get on with that now. Okay, so that's the second sleeve finished, which means we're on to attaching them to the main shirt. To set the sleeve, you need the main body of the shirt inside out and the sleeve the right way around. First, find the centre points of both the sleeve and the shirt. If you have a shoulder seam, that's the centre point for the shirt. Pin that down and then work out in one direction until you meet the tip of the gusset. After that, return to the centre point and work down the other side. This time when you meet the gusset, carry on, pinning the shirt to about crotch length so that the bottom can tuck between the legs. When I was sewing, I started from the gusset on one side, sewed around the sleeve, and then carried on down the side seam on the other side. I stitched the sleeves down with a back stitch as they'll take a bit of strain, and then switched to a running back stitch once I was past the gusset. Okay, so there has been some progress. There has also been some emergency shortenings. Me being the smart person that I am, I suddenly realised, yes, in the Tudor period, they went selvage to selvage. You know what isn't the same length as in Tudor times? Is a modern selvage, especially a modern selvage on a cotton. So I had pinned in one sleeve and I'd started to do one hem. I'd come all the way around into, I don't know, about here, so about half of a sleeve had gone in, and I ran out of thread and I looked at it and I went, this is a bit wide, let's look at this. And I realised I could literally cut it in half and it would still fit perfectly with plenty of space. So that's what I did. This is now literally half the size that it was. So rather than being flipped over, I just folded it in half, cut it in half, put the sleeves back in. It now means obviously that there is a seam on the shoulder, which is good and bad, but that's how it is. I did that with a back stitch because I know I'm going to be wearing this at cons, and at cons I always have a bag over my shoulder pretty much, and I wanted to just give it as much support as I could. That's all that's changed. It's just more of a rectangle in the other direction now, rather, because before it was kind of wide. So both sleeves are in and felled on the inside. They're looking pretty good. I'm very happy with this so far, especially now that it, you know, fits and I don't swim in it. You can see where it's been felled just because the fabric is so thin, but that's not a big issue. So the next job is to just hem down the bottom and the sides. It's a little bit uneven at the bottom, but I think I'm going to leave it because the unevenness is at the back, which is where I normally need a little bit of extra anyway, because, you know, obviously it goes over your bum, needs a little bit extra. So just couple of metered corners and just turn over those edges. So that's what it looks like on the inside. So you can just about see there where the stitching ends, and obviously where that happens I've had to trim the seam allowance to meet it so that I could turn it over above it. So I've done that, and just on the edge I've just done a blanket stitch to neaten that up. This is the armpit and that's exactly the same. I've just done a little blanket stitch and then secured it down. I think that's the one that's a little bit messy. Yeah, that's the one that's a little bit messy, but the other one's perfect, pretty much. Look at that. I could have redone the other one, but it's not that deep. So yeah, I'm turning over the edges, and then we'll be putting in the collar, and then we're done. Not too bad. Okay, so the next job is the necked gusset, which I have been putting off for various reasons. We've got a 9x9 square here with my seam allowance already marked on. It needs to be triangle though, so we're going to very scientifically fold this in half. I'm just going to show how bad my square is. And then take that down the middle so we've got two nice triangles. I want to mark the seam allowance here as well. The reason I marked the seam allowance around the edges first is because it's just easier to do the larger the fabric is. This is my ruler, and I can't be bothered to fetch a ruler. And the great advantage, like with sleeves of neck gussets, is that you've got two to work out what you're doing. So the long and the short of it is that I should have actually put this in when I did the shoulder seam, but I didn't. I know this now for the future. I had to do a little tiny bit of fudging, but I got it in place. It's not pressed or anything yet because I want to do both of them together. So, like I said, I'm having to fudge it a little bit. So what I'm doing is, rather than going into the corner, I'm going into the cut corner, pinning that down to sew. What it means is there's this little tail on the inside, so then what I have to do is put a couple of stitches on the inside there to straighten that out as well. I can show you on this side where I've done it. So this is where the gusset has been sewn in, and you can see where I originally turned it over, and then that tiny little row of stitches along there, that's where I've tucked it in, so that on the other side, it, once it's pressed anyway, will lie flat. So it just has a little bit of extra triangle there. It's not ideal. Ideally I should actually take it out and redo it, but a couple of things are wrong with this at this stage, and I don't have the energy to deal with it. At this stage, this is a very decorative mock-up, essentially, which, you know, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I've learned a lot doing it. That's the main thing, right? So next job is to stitch this down and then to press both of them and neaten them up. I'm just working on the final stages now. We've got the collar here, upside down. I've just used a running back stitch to stitch the sides together and then run some ties through. I'm just going to do the last one on camera for you, which is not the smartest one to have left for myself because it's one that I need to measure up, and I've got too many pieces of thread on the table now. Okay, so what I've done is just threaded this on a large blunt needle. I think it's a tapestry needle or something. I know I got it from a set donkeys years ago. Then I'm just going to line these two up. And it's kind of like an awl, it's so large and blunt, so I can just pass it in between the two seams, like so. That's it. And then it will just pop through. You can just feed it through. It's a little bit tricky to bring it through, because I obviously don't want to tear anything. And that's it. I've just put a knot on the end on the inside, so I can just pull that tight, and that's the last tie done. So if I undo that, put a knot on the end, and so with the last bit of the collar out of the way, I can now attach it. I've got both of my tiny little gussets in place with the edges folded over and neatened up, and I've already gone ahead and put my two gathering stitches in. Normally I would measure them, but this is the last stage and I'm ready to be finished, so I haven't, which is typical me. So I might end up losing one of these threads because it might end up underneath the collar when I finish it, but I've basically not wasted any thread this whole thing, so if I lose one at this stage I'm not too worried. I've also gone ahead and marked my quarter points, which are halfway on the gusset, and my midpoint on the back, just there. Obviously I didn't need to do the front. I've also done the same on the both sides of the inside of the collar, so I can line those up. I'm just pinning this down in exactly the same way I did the cuffs to the sleeves. I'm pinning it down to each quarter, then gathering it up in between and kneading it out with a pin or with my fingers until I'm happy with it, and then pinning it down into place. And so with the collar attached and pressed, we're on to the very final seam, which is just hemming the collar down on the other side. So I'm just making sure that I catch the fabric above the seam from attaching it so that nothing shows through on the other side. And yeah, it's just a case of felling this down quickly. Shouldn't take too long. Not the neatest piece of work I've ever done so far, because I'm doing it the wrong way around for some reason, but you know what? We are almost there. And one collar, which means one complete shirt. So now we're going to cut away to some nice shots of it in the daylight tomorrow. So, Aziraphale's shirt is finished. The actual sewing itself probably took less time than the embroidery. Just doing the shirt alone I think would probably take me about 2 weeks, especially now that I've done it once already and that I wouldn't be filming it. I'm really happy with the result. I'm really happy with it. I love wearing it. It's really comfortable. I am going to be remaking it though. Not because I'm not happy with this, not because I won't wear this, because I will. There are 2 reasons that I want to remake it specifically. One is that during the process of making it, I changed my mind about using cotton and decided I wanted a linen one instead. So I will be making a linen one sometime in the future. The second reason is I kind of had to fudge the neck gussets in a little bit because I didn't wait when I was changing the width of it, and what I should have done is put in the neck gussets then, because I had to fudge it a little bit so it doesn't fit as smoothly there as I would like it to. This whole project was a lesson in why you do a mock-up even on something so simple, because I made mistakes that I should not have done because I hadn't made a mock-up. Fortunately, my next job is to do a mock-up for the trunk hose, despite the fact that I don't have hose yet, and that is because I need to start ordering fabric for both the doublet and the trunk hose, and I can't quite figure out how the trunk hose work from just looking at them. Once I've done that mock-up, I'll then be going backwards a step and making the hose, so that's what's coming up in the future. I won't say near future, I'm talking about 6 months, but we're already a month into those 6 months. So, shirt is finished, part 1 is finished, and I am super happy with it. If you have any questions about the process, please throw them at me, and if there's any part that you think I didn't show well enough that you want me to try and focus on making sure comes across in the next video, please let me know that as well, because I want to improve this. I want people to be able to learn from my mistakes, but I want people to be able to learn from what I did as well. Hopefully, there's some quality content in there. As normal, let me know what you're working on at the moment. Also, let me know how many historical undergarments you have, how many copies of shirts, chemises, how many different corsets. Let's get a conversation going about how many people have, how many times people have made them, because all of that stuff is great to hear. And I shall see you in 2 weeks. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, think about following for the rest of this series. Like I said, I've got lots in the works, not just on Aziraphale, but some other stuff as well. And if you enjoyed this video, think about leaving a like as well. And we will see you again sometime soon. Thank you.